I'd like to do a general background piece on the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and it's all about maps. Now, maps don't necessarily excite many people, but believe me, in peace processes, they are fundamental. I would remind you that in the drafting of the Treaty of Versailles, which took months and years, a few meters of frontier in Belgium were argued over for 3-4 months at a time. The map of the Middle East was done in less than a month. Today, we are living with the consequences of the map of the Middle East. Maps are important, and they're the sort of thing that the parties have got to haggle over themselves. Maps that are imposed upon people, like the map of the Middle East, eventually come back to bite the imposers. And with that as a background, I'd like to talk about the maps that shaped Bosnia-Herzegovina. In this first slide, I'd like you to look at the map of the ethnic backgrounds of the general Western Balkans region. You can see all the surrounding countries. You can see that there are blobs and blobs of color everywhere. I don't want you to worry about which color is which ethnicity. I don't want you to worry about anything except the impression. Lots and lots of different peoples intermingled, intermixed. And now a quote from the president of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, who said, "Why should I be a minority in your country when if we change the map, you could be a minority in mine?" And that, I think, guides us in many parts of the world to the difficulty of maps and how we should be much more respectful of maps. And we shouldn't try to fit maps to people, but people should be allowed to draw their own maps as best they can, even if it looks messy, and I'll come back to that later on. So that's the Western Balkans. Now let's look at Bosnia-Herzegovina. This was a map of the relative distributions of different ethnicities and confessions in Bosnia-Herzegovina. It was carefully put together for Mr. Vance and Mr. Owen, whose peace plan was one of the early peace plans for Bosnia-Herzegovina. And now I can tell you that, talking to all of my friends who have been involved in this process, it was without doubt the best map ever produced. And that every map that was subsequently produced was less and less likely to sustain a sustainable Bosnia-Herzegovina and possibly even peace. Am I being alarmist? I don't think so. Let's look now at this next slide, which is the final Vance-Owen map that was put to the parties. That first one was the raw data, and this is what Vance-Owen did. They said, well, we can't do this municipality by municipality, but we can do it district by district or region by region, and we'll see what we come up with. And what they come up with here is a messy jigsaw puzzle that would have been a much, much better solution than the final Dayton map. And I leave you with that because I've already cautioned you about what happened with the Middle East, and we'll move on again. And now we'll look at the final Dayton map. Notice we have gone from super messy, super colors, lots of little blobs, lots of little bits and pieces, to two fundamental entities. And what has happened here is the map of Bosnia has been Middle Easted. All of the subtleties, all of the nuances, all of the possibilities have been put into just two entities. Tidy, very tidy. Major influence here was the influence of the military. The military wanted to make sure that it was a tidy, easily enforced boundary between the two political entities that were formed in Bosnia. When you make hard boundaries, if you've seen the Dave Snowden birthday party video, Dave says, be careful of hard boundaries because people will use them against you. And now we have seen, particularly in the last while, 25 years after Dayton was signed, we see that the Serbs in Republika Srpska, because they have a contiguous territory, they have one oddly shaped, but it's all joined up. They are now agitating like mad to leave Bosnia. Very interesting article written on this by Professor Gart Nash and various of his other academic friends, and published as an op-ed piece in The Guardian only a week ago. So, what we have now with the Dayton map was an easy to enforce by the soldiers, but very, very politically advantageous to the Serb side map of Bosnia-Herzegovina. And if there is trouble again in Bosnia, the map will be the fundamental reason for that trouble. Maps are really important. So how, if we look at the Cynefin framework, should we really do maps? We've got to treat them not as obvious, and this Dayton map is an obvious map. It's got hard boundaries, it's very simple. It isn't even a case of the complicated map, and certainly the Vance Owen map was a complicated map. If you really want lasting peace, you've got to have a map that the locals can influence themselves and that can adapt and evolve in the way that the local people adapt and evolve. Now, is that easy? No. Is it easy to police? No. Is it easy to enforce? Not at all. But if the local people want it, they will do it themselves. They will actually enforce it and do it themselves. Maps should be drawn only with the full input of local people, and they've got to be drawn knowing that the one you produce is imperfect and it will be modified and adapted. Because internally, people are always modifying and adapting. All the democracies of Europe continually change from time to time the boundaries of their voting areas as population rises or falls in certain areas. So, there are ways of doing adaptive mapping. It's done in many countries. It should have been done here in Bosnia, but it wasn't. That's my background on the maps of Bosnia.